Mariela slipped through the Beast King's chamber without a sound. Moonlight spilled across the polished stone floor, stopping just short of the man standing alone at the open window. His broad shoulders never shifted. He never reached for a weapon. It was as though he had expected the silence behind him. She drew the poisoned dagger hidden beneath her sleeve. One strike, one heartbeat, one king less. The blade rose toward his back. Then his voice broke the silence. "Mariela, you finally arrived." Her breath caught. He hadn't turned around. He couldn't have seen her, yet he knew her name. Before she could move, armored footsteps thundered through the corridor. Guards flooded the chamber, swords drawn. The Beast King finally faced her. His golden eyes held no fear, only recognition. Then he gave the one command no one in the room expected. No one is to harm her. She does not leave Moonfang. Before we begin, like the video and subscribe for more unforgettable werewolf romance stories. No one moved. The chamber remained frozen beneath the weight of Alpha King Roven's command. Captain Malis was the first to find his voice. "Your Majesty, she came here to assassinate you." Roven never looked away from Mariela. "I am aware." The captain hesitated, his grip tightening around the hilt of his sword, before he finally lowered the blade. The guards obeyed, though none of them hid their confusion. Crossbows slowly dipped toward the floor, yet every pair of eyes remained fixed on the human woman standing in the center of the chamber. Mariela's pulse thundered in her ears. She had prepared herself for capture, for torture, even for death. She had never prepared herself for mercy. Roven stepped closer, close enough for her to see the faint silver scars crossing the back of his hand. They were old scars, earned long before he had worn a crown. His golden eyes settled briefly on the bronze wolf pendant resting against her chest, before returning to her face. "Escort Lady Mariela to the East Tower. She is to be treated as an honored guest, not a prisoner." The words sent a ripple through the room. One of the older nobles standing near the doorway could no longer remain silent. "An honored guest? She carried poison into your chambers. She deserves the execution yard." Roven's expression never changed. "My decision has been made." No one challenged him again, not aloud. But Mariela noticed the looks exchanged between the nobles. Suspicion, disapproval, fear. As Captain Malis guided her from the chamber, she expected rough hands or chains. Neither came. The captain simply gestured toward the corridor. "This way." She followed in silence. The palace was unlike anything she had imagined. Instead of endless halls filled with trophies of war, the corridors displayed paintings, carved histories, and shelves lined with books. Servants greeted passing guards with relaxed smiles. No one flinched, no one hid, no one behaved like prisoners living beneath a tyrant. She hated herself for noticing. The East Tower overlooked nearly the entire capital. When the heavy wooden door closed behind her, Mariela immediately searched the room. One entrance, 2 windows, no hidden passages, no visible guards inside, only a fire burning quietly in the hearth. Fresh bread rested beside a pitcher of water. Someone had even placed clean traveling clothes neatly across the foot of the bed. It felt less like captivity, and more like hospitality. That unsettled her far more than chains ever could. She ignored the food, ignored the bed. Instead, she crossed to the window. The city stretched beneath her. Market lanterns still flickered despite the late hour. Bakers carried warm loaves through narrow streets. Children chased one another across a moonlit square, while exhausted parents laughed from nearby benches. A little girl stumbled. Before she could cry, a towering werewolf lifted her onto his shoulders. She burst into laughter. Mariela frowned. That wasn't possible. Monsters didn't laugh with children. Monsters didn't tuck blankets around sleepy toddlers. Monsters didn't kiss their families goodnight before closing shop for the evening. Her fingers instinctively found the pendant hanging around her neck. The Order warned you about this. They said monsters imitate kindness. Do not trust what you see. She repeated the lesson until her breathing steadied. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Captain Malis entered carrying a tray. You haven't eaten. She said nothing. He placed the tray on the table. You think we're trying to poison you. Still nothing. He surprised her with the faintest smile. If we wanted you dead, you wouldn't have reached the castle. He left before she could answer. Hours passed. The castle eventually grew quiet. Mariela waited, then waited longer, until finally, she slipped from her room. No guards stood outside, only empty corridors illuminated by moonlight. Too easy. Either the Beast King was a fool, or he wanted her to try. She moved like a shadow through the sleeping palace. Every corridor, every staircase, every turn brought her closer to the royal chambers. She found him exactly where she expected, not sleeping, not surrounded by soldiers. He stood alone in the palace gardens, beneath an enormous silver oak overlooking the valley, without armor, without weapons, without guards. The perfect opportunity. Mariela silently removed another dagger. This blade carried no poison. Steel alone would be enough. She closed the distance. 20 steps. 15. 10. 5. She could already picture the strike. One swift movement, then freedom. Her grip tightened. The blade rose. Rovan spoke without turning around. If everything you believed was a lie, would you still kill me? Her arm froze. Not because she feared him, because she didn't know the answer. For the first time since entering Moonfang, doubt found a place inside her certainty. She lowered the dagger by a fraction. It was enough. When she looked up again, Rovan had quietly walked away into the darkness without ever looking back. Mariela stood alone beneath the silver oak, the unanswered question echoing louder than any battle cry. Far above the palace, inside the royal archive, Rovan unlocked an ancient wooden chest hidden behind a stone wall. Carefully, he unfolded a faded portrait preserved for decades. A young woman smiled from the canvas. Around her neck rested a bronze wolf pendant, the very same pendant Mariela had worn into his chamber. Morning sunlight spilled across the eastern tower, but Mariela had barely slept. The faded portrait she had glimpsed in Alpha King Rovan's hands refused to leave her thoughts. The woman in the painting had worn the same bronze wolf pendant. It couldn't be coincidence. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Captain Maelis waited outside. His usual guarded expression had softened into quiet professionalism. His Majesty requests your presence. Mariela narrowed her eyes. To question me? To show you something. She followed him through the palace. This time she paid closer attention. Servants greeted Maelis by name. Children darted through the courtyards, chasing one another beneath blooming trees. Several young wolves in training bowed respectfully when Rovan crossed the grounds in the distance. No one cowered. No one scattered in fear. The picture she had carried of Moonfang continued to crack. Maelis noticed her watching. Disappointed? She looked at him. About what? That we're not the monsters you expected. She offered no reply. He didn't seem offended. Most humans expect blood on every street. Most wolves expect humans to poison every cup. Turns out both sides are equally imaginative. It was the first time she had heard humor from anyone in Moonfang. She wasn't sure how to respond. Instead of turning toward the archives, Maelis led her through the upper courtyard. A crowd had gathered beneath an ancient oak. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen, no noble banners, no jeweled robes. Only ordinary people. At the center stood Alpha King Rovan. A grey-haired farmer spoke first. My neighbor claims the river belongs to his family because his grandfather planted the willow trees. The younger farmer immediately objected. The flood changed the river's course years ago. The old boundary no longer exists. The crowd waited. Rovan stepped down from the stone platform instead of remaining above them. He walked to a hand-drawn map spread across the table. How many seasons has the river followed its new course? 12. Then the land has already decided what men continue arguing over. He looked at both farmers. The fields remain with the family who has cultivated them these past 12 years. The willow grove belongs to both households. The fruit will be shared equally every harvest. Neither man looked entirely satisfied. Neither looked cheated. Both bowed. The next petitioner approached. An elderly widow carried a broken hunting bow. My son died last winter. The tax collector still demands payment in his name. Rovan turned toward one of his advisors. Strike the debt from the record. The advisor hesitated. The treasury will survive. He looked back at the widow. Your son served Moonfang. Moonfang will not profit from his absence. The woman pressed trembling fingers against her lips before quietly thanking him. Mariela watched every exchange. No threats, no fear. No one hurried to agree simply because a king had spoken. People argued with him, questioned him, disagreed, and walked away believing they had been heard. The image of the merciless Beast King grew harder to hold. Rovan glanced toward her only once before the final petitioner stepped forward. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Mariela quietly continued walking. Now, the royal archives. Inside, towering shelves stretched toward the ceiling. Maps, journals, treaties, and centuries of records filled the enormous chamber. Rovan entered moments later. Without his ceremonial cloak, he looked less like an untouchable ruler and more like a man carrying responsibilities few could understand. He gestured toward the pendant around her neck. May I see it? Mariela instinctively stepped back. No. He nodded once. Fair enough. Then answer one question. Who gave it to you? My mother. Do you remember her? Barely. She died when I was little. Rovan's gaze lowered. I thought as much. Something in his voice sounded like regret. Not calculation, not manipulation. Regret. Before Mariela could ask another question, an elderly archivist hurried inside, carrying several worn ledgers. Your Majesty, the records you requested. The old man spread them across the table. Rovan opened one carefully. 30-year-old trade manifests. Another contained diplomatic correspondence between Moonfang and Alaris. Mariela frowned. These aren't war records. Exactly. They're peace records. He turned another page. Sketches of merchants, joint harvest festivals, shared military patrols protecting trade routes, children from both kingdoms standing together during spring celebrations. Mariela stared silently. This wasn't possible. The order taught that humans and werewolves had always been enemies. Always? Rovan quietly asked. History rarely begins with always. He slid one faded drawing toward her. Two rulers stood smiling beneath banners bearing both kingdoms' crests. No weapons, no soldiers, only celebration. This was 3 months before the Night of Broken Moons. Mariela looked at the smiling faces. They looked nothing like enemies. Someone is lying. Rovan met her eyes. Yes. The question is, who? The words lingered between them. For the first time, Mariela found herself hoping the answer wasn't the one she feared. Later that afternoon, shouting echoed from the palace courtyard. Several young wolf trainees had been sparring when one misjudged his landing. A heavy wooden practice beam collapsed. A young girl cried out beneath it. Without thinking, Mariela ran. The surrounding soldiers hesitated. She didn't. Dropping to one knee, she wedged both hands beneath the timber, while another trainee pulled the frightened child free. The girl's arm bled heavily. Mariela immediately tore a strip from her own sleeve. Pressure here. Keep her breathing steady. The children obeyed without question. Moments later, palace healers arrived. One elderly healer glanced at Mariela with genuine surprise. You learned battlefield medicine. The order trained everyone. The healer smiled faintly. Then today, they unknowingly saved one of our own. Mariela looked away. She wasn't sure how to feel. That evening, a gentle knock came at her chamber door. When she opened it, no one stood outside. Only the little wolf girl she had rescued earlier. She couldn't have been older than 8. In her small hands rested a roughly carved wooden wolf. Its ears were uneven. One leg was slightly shorter than the others. She held it out with both hands. I made this for you. Mariela blinked. For me? The little girl nodded enthusiastically. Mama says brave people should have something to remind them they aren't alone. Mariela accepted the carving with uncertain hands. It was clumsy, far from perfect, and somehow, it felt more valuable than anything she had carried in years. The child studied her quietly. May I ask you something? Mariela nodded. Are humans really afraid of us? The question landed like an arrow. Mariela opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The little girl wasn't asking with anger. only curiosity. She had never hated humans. She simply didn't understand why they hated her. After a long silence, Mariela crouched until they were eye level. "I don't know anymore." The child smiled, as though that answer was enough. Then she skipped down the corridor toward her waiting mother. Mariela remained standing in the doorway long after they disappeared. For the first time, she wondered if fear had always belonged to the stories, and never to the children. That evening she found Rovan standing alone before a stone memorial overlooking the valley. Hundreds of names had been carved into its surface. Fresh white flowers rested beneath them. "You come here often? Every full moon? Family? Friends? Citizens?" Some were both. He rested one hand against the weathered stone. Their names deserved to be remembered. Mariela expected anger. Instead, she found grief. The silence between them became unexpectedly comfortable, until a distant horn shattered it. Scouts rode through the palace gates at full speed. One horse stumbled into the courtyard, foam covering its neck. Captain Malis met the riders first. Bandits attacked a farming settlement near the eastern woods. "Children are trapped." Rovan turned immediately. "Prepare the riders." Mariela watched as servants rushed to gather armor. Minutes later, Rovan and his guards disappeared toward the eastern forests. She remained at the memorial long after they had gone. Near midnight, the riders returned. Several soldiers carried the wounded. Rovan dismounted last. Blood soaked one sleeve where a deep claw had torn through his arm, while shielding a frightened child from a rogue beast driven toward the village. The palace healers hurried him into the infirmary. From the hallway, Mariela watched unnoticed. When the healers stepped away to prepare herbs, she slipped inside. Old instincts took over. She cleaned the wound, removed splintered fragments, wrapped fresh bandages with practiced hands. Rovan studied her quietly. "You still have time." She paused. "To do what?" "Finish what you came here to do." His sword rested against the wall. Her own dagger remained hidden beneath her cloak. He had placed himself completely within her reach. One quick movement, the mission would be over. Her fingers found the hilt, then stopped, because the man sitting before her didn't resemble the monster she had crossed kingdoms to kill. Outside the chamber, unseen by either of them, a shadow slipped silently through the corridor. The intruder ignored the royal treasury, ignored the armory, ignored the king. Instead, the figure disappeared toward the eastern tower, toward Mariela's room, searching for only one thing, the bronze wolf pendant. The eastern tower had been searched from floor to ceiling, drawers emptied, floorboards pried open. Even the seams beneath the mattress had been cut apart. Yet nothing had been stolen. Captain Malis stood in the center of the room, slowly studying the destruction. Whoever came here wasn't looking for gold. Mariela instinctively reached for the bronze pendant beneath her cloak. They came for this. Malis nodded grimly. Then the king was right. She looked at him. "About what?" "That keeping you here wasn't imprisonment. It was protection." Within the hour, Mariela stood once more inside the royal archives. Morning light filtered through towering stained glass windows as Rovan listened while Malis described every detail of the break-in. When the captain finished, silence settled over the room. Rovan looked directly at Mariela. "Now do you understand why I couldn't let you leave?" She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she had survived far worse. But someone had crossed an entire kingdom searching for one pendant. Not for her, not to kill her, only for the pendant. That frightened her far more than any assassin. Rovan disappeared into a locked chamber and returned carrying a small wooden case reinforced with iron. Inside rested an intricate silver instrument, unlike anything Mariela had ever seen, an old royal cipher. It reveals engravings too small for the eye to see. His gaze settled on the pendant. "May I?" For the first time since entering Moonfang, Mariela removed the pendant herself. She placed it gently into his hand. Rovan handled it as though it were priceless. He turned it beneath the crystal lens. Nothing. Then he pressed a nearly invisible groove, hidden beneath its edge. A soft click echoed through the room. The pendant slowly opened. Mariela stared. A hidden compartment. Folded inside rested a strip of impossibly thin parchment. Beside it lay a polished silver fragment covered with markings no larger than grains of sand. Rowan carefully unfolded the parchment. The Covenant of Two Moons. Mariela whispered the title before she realized she had spoken. It still exists. Rowan nodded slowly. Someone risked everything to make sure it did. Together, they examined the treaty. The signatures of both rulers remained untouched. Promises filled the page. Shared borders, mutual protection, trade, education, peace. Mariela's fingers trembled. "This can't be real." "It can." His voice remained quiet, which means someone worked very hard, convincing both kingdoms it wasn't. The silver fragment revealed another secret beneath the cipher. Names, delegates, military officers, royal advisors. Every person expected to attend the Night of Broken Moons. One seal appeared beside only a single name. High Chancellor Vadrin Morkant. Mariela frowned. Why would his seal be hidden here? Rowan's expression darkened. Because someone wanted history to remember a different story. Before either of them could speak again, the archive doors exploded inward. Smoke rushed into the chamber. A burning torch rolled across the polished floor. Fire! Archivists scattered in every direction. Masked figures poured through the smoke. Not soldiers. Professional thieves. One charged directly toward the table. Not the shelves. Not the royal records. Only the Covenant. Rowan shoved Mariela backward. "Take the treaty!" She caught the parchment just as another attacker swung a curved blade toward her. Captain Malis intercepted the strike. Steel clashed through the archive. Books tumbled from towering shelves. Flames spread rapidly across ancient scrolls. One masked thief snatched the silver fragment from the table. Mariela lunged. Their hands collided. The fragment slipped across the floor. The thief kicked it toward another accomplice. "No!" Mariela dove after it. Rowan reached her first. Together they trapped the fragment beneath a fallen shelf before the thieves could recover it. The attackers exchanged a quick glance. Retreat. Within seconds they disappeared into the smoke as quickly as they had arrived. The archive continued burning. Bucket lines formed immediately. Servants, guards, archivists. Everyone worked side by side to save as many records as possible. By sunset, the fire had been extinguished. Several shelves had been lost. But the Covenant and the silver fragment had survived. Mariela looked at the smoke-blackened ceiling. Someone was willing to burn centuries of history just to destroy one treaty. Rowan quietly answered. "That means we're closer to the truth than I hoped." Later that evening, rain began falling over Moonfang. The palace settled into unusual silence. Mariela wandered the western gallery overlooking the storm. She no longer knew where certainty ended, or doubt began. Footsteps approached behind her. Rowan stopped beside the balcony without speaking. Rain washed across the valley below. Finally, he broke the silence. "Tomorrow is your birthday." Mariela looked at him, confused. "I don't know when I was born. The Order celebrated the day they accepted me, not the day I entered the world." He looked toward the rain. "That's a lonely way to measure a life." She tried to laugh. It was practical, perhaps, but everyone deserves one day that belongs only to them. Neither said another word. The rain filled the silence between them. The following morning, Mariela opened her chamber door. A small wooden tray rested quietly outside. Fresh bread, wild berries, a tiny honey cake no larger than her hand. Beside it lay a single white flower gathered from the palace gardens. No note, no explanation. She looked down the empty corridor. She already knew who had left it. For reasons she couldn't explain, her chest tightened. No one had ever celebrated her existence before, not once. She carried the tray inside without touching the cake. It remained untouched for several minutes. Then, very carefully, she broke off the smallest piece. That evening, she found Rowan waiting beside the palace stables. "Walk with me." They followed an old forest path overlooking the valley. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. Finally, Rowan stopped. "There is something you deserve to know before anyone else tells you." She waited. Years ago, before I became king, I led an attack against a settlement called Silver Brook. Mariela's heartbeat slowed. He continued. Our intelligence claimed enemy soldiers were hiding there. It was false. Families had taken shelter instead. Children, farmers, refugees. His voice grew quieter. By the time I realized the truth, it was already over. Mariela stared at him. Silver Brook. Her mother had spoken that name only once. The village where families connected to her childhood had disappeared. You were there. Yes. He never looked away. I've carried their names every day since. The pain she had buried for years surged to the surface. Before she could stop herself, she struck him across the face. The sound echoed through the trees. Rovan didn't move, didn't defend himself, didn't even raise a hand. You killed innocent people. Yes. His answer came without hesitation. Because I believed a lie, just as you believed one when you crossed my border carrying poison. The words struck deeper than anger. Neither of them had chosen hatred. Someone else had chosen it for them. Mariela turned away. She couldn't bear to look at him. Not yet. For the rest of that day, she avoided him completely. She ate alone, walked alone, refused every conversation Captain Maylis gently attempted. The little wooden wolf sat untouched beside her window. She wanted to leave. She wanted to hate him. Instead, she found herself hating the unseen man who had stolen both their lives long before they ever met. Late that night, she wandered toward the palace gardens. She found Rovan exactly where she expected, standing alone beneath the silver oak. He didn't turn, didn't speak. She stood beside him in silence. After several long moments, she quietly asked, "If we expose the truth, will it bring them back?" Rovan's answer came almost as softly as the wind. "No, but perhaps it will stop someone else from losing them." Mariela closed her eyes. Her anger remained. Her grief remained. But something stronger had taken root. Purpose. At dawn, the royal cipher revealed one final hidden line within the covenant. Coordinates. An abandoned watchtower deep inside the border forest. Rovan, Mariela, Captain Maylis, and 2 trusted riders reached the ruins before sunset. Hidden beneath collapsed stonework rested a sealed chest wrapped in rotting cloth. Inside waited journals, official correspondence, personal letters, enough forgotten history to bury the lie forever. One letter described armed men wearing both human and werewolf armor before the massacre had even begun. Not enemies, disguises. Someone had planned every death. Mariela looked toward the distant mountains. The Order has to see this. Rovan immediately shook his head. No, if someone burned an archive to destroy the covenant, you cannot assume anyone is innocent. She searched his face. She found only concern. Even so, her decision had already been made. Before sunrise, she saddled a horse alone. She left the journals hidden within Moonfang, but carried the pendant beneath her cloak. Far behind her, Rovan stood on the mountain ridge, watching her ride toward Alaris. He made no attempt to stop her, only whispered to the empty wind, "Please don't let me be right." Mariela crossed the border. She had traveled less than a mile before dozens of riders emerged from the trees. White thorn cloaks, familiar faces. Relief flooded her chest. It disappeared the instant swords surrounded her. The commander raised his blade. "By order of the White Thorn, Mariela, you are under arrest for treason." Mariela did not resist. 8 riders surrounded her, their white cloaks marked with the thorn insignia she had once worn with pride. Every face was familiar. Men and women who had trained beside her, who had celebrated her victories, who had mourned her mother's death. None of them met her eyes. The commander took her weapons first, then reached for the bronze pendant. Mariela instinctively stepped back. Not this. His expression hardened. Especially that. He tore the pendant from her neck. The sudden emptiness against her chest hurt more than she expected. "Bind her." Heavy iron shackles closed around her wrists. As they rode toward the Order's fortress, Mariela searched every face for an explanation. No one offered one. The gates opened. Stone walls she had once called home rose before her. Nothing had changed. The same training yard. The same watchtowers, the same chapel where she had whispered childhood prayers before every mission. Only now, every doorway felt unfamiliar. She was marched through the central hall, while whispers followed her. Traitor, monster lover, king's pet. Each word struck harder than steel. Inside the council chamber, the 12 elders waited behind a long oak table. At its center sat Grand Master Othric, the man who had raised her after her mother's death. His silver beard had grown longer, his eyes had grown colder. Mariela knelt without being ordered. Grand Master, I found evidence. The Beast King isn't... Silence. His voice echoed through the chamber. You were sent to kill a monster. Instead, you returned protecting one. You failed your order. You failed humanity. Mariela forced herself to stay calm. I found the original covenant. The Night of Broken Moons wasn't enough. Othric rose slowly. Did the Beast King teach you these lies, or did you volunteer to believe them? Mariela looked around the chamber. Not one elder appeared surprised. Not one asked to see the evidence. Something inside her shifted. If they truly wanted the truth, why wouldn't they even look? The realization settled like ice. They had already decided what truth was allowed to exist. Othric extended his hand. The pendant. Mariela stared at him. You knew. His face revealed nothing. Knew what? That my mother wasn't protecting humanity. She was protecting this. A flicker crossed one elder's face. Gone almost instantly. Fear. Not grief. Fear. Othric lowered his hand. Search her. 2 guards stepped forward. They searched every pocket, every seam. The pendant was gone. One of the riders had already taken it. Othric seemed almost relieved. Take her below. Judgment will be carried out before sunrise. The dungeon smelled of damp stone and rust. Hours passed. Mariela sat alone beneath a narrow window no wider than her hand. Everything she believed had collapsed. Her mother, the order, the mission, even the hatred she had carried. Footsteps approached. She expected a guard. Instead, an elderly woman carrying fresh water quietly entered the cell. Lady Elsin, the healer. She had stitched Mariela's wounds throughout childhood. She had taught her how to stop bleeding with torn cloth and steady hands. Elsin looked around before kneeling beside the cell. Child, what have they done? Mariela gripped the iron bars. Tell me the truth, please. The old healer closed her eyes. Your mother begged them not to hide what she found. She said another war would come if they buried the truth. Mariela's breathing stopped. She wasn't killed by werewolves. No. Elsin's voice trembled. She was murdered before sunrise. By order of the council. Mariela's world shattered. Why? Because she refused to surrender the pendant. She said one day, you would understand why it mattered. The healer hurried away as footsteps echoed down the corridor. Minutes later, 2 guards dragged Mariela toward the execution yard. The corridor passed behind the council chamber. Raised voices drifted through the heavy oak doors. Mariela slowed her steps. Everything is proceeding as planned. Grand Master Othric. Another voice answered. Calm, measured. High Chancellor Vadrin. The pendant is secured. Excellent. And the Beast King? He'll cross the border for her. Exactly as predicted. Mariela's pulse quickened. This wasn't chance. Someone had planned every step. Another elder spoke. Once both kingdoms commit their armies, neither side will question how the war began. History always belongs to the victor. The guard shoved her forward. Keep moving. They descended another flight of stairs toward the execution courtyard. Then everything changed. A tremendous explosion shook the fortress. Dust rained from the ceiling. Alarm bells erupted across the walls. Attack! Guards sprinted toward the battlements. Crossbows were snatched from weapon racks. The soldier holding Mariela's chains stumbled as another explosion rocked the corridor. The iron keys slipped from his belt. They skidded across the floor. Mariela reacted instantly. She snatched them, unlocked one wrist, then the other. Freedom stood only a few steps away. To her left, a narrow passage led toward the vault where the pendant had been taken. To her right, a cry echoed from deeper within the fortress. Help! Lady Elsin! Mariela froze. If she recovered the pendant, the strongest evidence against Vadrin would be hers again. If she ignored the healer, Elsin would almost certainly die. Only seconds remained. Another blast shook the walls. Mariela closed her eyes, then ran. Not toward the vault, toward the voice. She found Lady Elsin trapped beneath a collapsed wooden beam as smoke poured through the corridor. The elderly healer struggled to breathe. "You came back." Mariela dropped beside her. "Don't speak." Together they pushed against the heavy timber. It refused to move. Mariela shifted her footing and braced both shoulders beneath the beam. With a cry of effort, she lifted just enough for Elsin to crawl free. The old woman collapsed into Mariela's arms. The ceiling groaned overhead. They staggered toward the nearest exit, just as flames swallowed the corridor behind them. By the time they emerged into the courtyard, the fortress had descended into chaos. Moonfang warriors clashed with Whitethorn soldiers beneath sheets of rain. Captain Malis cut through the confusion with disciplined precision. Behind him, Alpha King Rovan dismounted before the shattered gates. His eyes searched the battlefield. The moment they found Mariela, relief replaced every trace of tension. He crossed the courtyard without hesitation. "Are you hurt?" Mariela shook her head, then remembered. The pendant. They took it. Rovan's expression remained calm. "We'll recover it. You chose the healer." Mariela looked at Lady Elsin leaning weakly against a stone wall. "I couldn't leave her." Rovan gave the smallest nod. "Neither could I." For the first time, Mariela realized she had made exactly the choice he would have made. Not because he had taught her, because she had finally become the person she wanted to be. Captain Malis approached. "We're surrounded. More riders are coming." Rovan gently helped Lady Elsin onto a waiting horse, then turned toward the hidden tunnel beneath the western wall. This way, they escaped through forgotten passages beneath the fortress, while battle raged above them. By dawn, they reached the border forest. Rain had finally stopped. Lady Elsin rested beside a quiet stream, while Captain Malis kept watch. Mariela stood alone beneath the trees. Everything she had believed was gone. The order, her purpose, her certainty. Rovan joined her. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Mariela reached for his hand, not because she needed someone to hold her up, but because trust had become stronger than fear. High above the valley, unseen by any of them, signal fires ignited one after another across the mountain ridges. Within hours, both kingdoms would believe the other had launched the first attack. The war Vadrin had spent 30 years preparing had finally begun. By sunrise, the border was burning. Columns of black smoke climbed into the grey morning sky, while frightened families fled in opposite directions. Human villages blamed the werewolves. Werewolf settlements blamed the humans. Neither side knew the first attack had come from men wearing stolen armor. The lie was working. Mariela rode beside Alpha King Rovan through the forest overlooking the valley. Every few miles they found another tragedy. A burned farmhouse, an abandoned wagon, a child's wooden toy lying in the mud. War had arrived faster than either of them imagined. Captain Malis suddenly raised a hand. Movement ahead. They dismounted and moved through the trees. Beyond the ridge lay a small border village. Half the homes had already burned. Human families huddled around one side of the square. Werewolf families occupied the other. Both stared at the single supply wagon standing between them. An elderly monk stood beside it, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "This is all the food we have left. It won't feed everyone." The human elder stepped forward. "Our children haven't eaten since yesterday." Immediately, a werewolf mother answered, "Neither have ours." The square fell silent. Fear had become hunger. Hunger was becoming violence. Every hand drifted toward a weapon. Mariela looked from one group to the other. She saw the same frightened eyes, the same exhausted parents, the same children hiding behind trembling legs. She climbed onto the supply wagon. Everyone looked up. "No one leaves hungry today," someone shouted from the crowd. "There isn't enough." Mariela nodded. "Not enough for comfort. Enough for tomorrow. If we share it, if we fight, no one survives the week." She began dividing the sacks herself. Half to the humans, half to the werewolves. Several people protested. She ignored them. Then something unexpected happened. A human baker quietly tore one loaf in half and handed it to the werewolf child standing nearest him. Moments later, a werewolf hunter passed dried meat to an elderly human woman whose hands shook too badly to cut it herself. The tension dissolved, not completely, but enough. Captain Malis smiled quietly. You just fed more than stomachs. Mariela looked toward the children eating together beneath the old well. Maybe that's where peace starts. They left the village before sunset. Behind them, no swords were drawn. Only bread was broken. The journey continued toward Black Hollow Abbey. An exhausted messenger intercepted them before they reached the mountain pass. Your Majesty. The archivist survived. He has another ledger. He's waiting at the abbey. Hope returned for the first time in days. The ancient monastery stood hidden among towering cliffs. Its weathered stone walls had survived generations of war. Inside the candlelit library, the elderly archivist bowed weakly. I feared these would die with me. He placed a weathered ledger upon the table. Rovan carefully opened it. Letters, orders, financial records, payments to mercenaries, instructions written in Vadran's own hand. Then, the final page. Ensure no delegate leaves alive. Silence settled over the library. Every lie, every murder, every stolen generation, written plainly in black ink. The archivist reached into another chest. There is one last thing. Wrapped in faded linen rested the ceremonial banner from the original peace summit. Both kingdoms' crests stood embroidered beneath the same silver moon. Rovan gently touched one edge. My father carried this. Mariela rested her hand upon the other. My mother protected it. Outside, hoofbeats thundered through the valley. Captain Malis looked through the narrow window. We're surrounded. Flaming arrows crashed through the stained glass windows. The library erupted into chaos. Masked soldiers stormed through the smoke wearing mixed armor stolen from both kingdoms. Confusion had become Vadran's greatest weapon. The archivist clutched the ledger tightly. Maelis stepped between him and the attackers. Take the evidence. Go. Rovan and Mariela fought toward the hidden passage, while monks hurried terrified children through collapsing corridors. The abbey shook violently. A burning support beam crashed across the final exit. Smoke swallowed the hall. Children screamed. Without hesitation, Captain Malis charged toward the flames. He braced both shoulders beneath the burning timber. The weight forced him to one knee. Go! One by one, the children crawled beneath the opening. The monks followed. The archivist carrying the ledger stumbled through. Then came the last child. A little boy froze in terror beneath the smoke. Malis smiled at him. Come on, little wolf. Your story isn't finished yet. The child ran. The instant he reached safety, the ceiling gave way. Stone and fire buried Captain Malis beneath the collapsing hall. Mariela screamed. Rovan lunged forward. The remaining roof crashed between them. There was nothing left to save. Only silence. Hours later, dawn broke over the blackened ruins. No one spoke. The survivors gathered around a simple mound of stone, built above the place where Captain Malis had fallen. Rovan removed the wolf emblem clasp from his cloak and laid it gently upon the stones. Mariela placed the small wooden wolf beside it, the carving the little girl had given her. She could think of no one who deserved it more. Lady Elsin bowed her head. The elderly archivist wiped away quiet tears. Then, a soft cry broke the silence. One of the rescued human children had begun crying beside the ruins. Before anyone else could move, a werewolf mother who had lost her own son during the fighting knelt beside him. She wrapped him in her cloak, rocked him gently, hummed a lullaby. The little boy buried his face against her shoulder. No one commented. No one questioned it. Mariela watched with tears in her eyes. This was the world Maelis had died believing was still possible. The archivist stepped forward, holding the recovered ledger tightly against his chest. His sacrifice wasn't in vain. Now the truth belongs to everyone. Before anyone could answer, an arrow struck the earth at Rovan's feet. A black ribbon fluttered from its shaft. He untied the parchment. His expression changed immediately. Mariela took the message from his hand. Bring the pendant and the evidence to the old summit hall. "Come alone, or the healer dies first." Pinned beneath the note rested a silver brooch. Lady Elsin reached trembling fingers toward it. "My brooch!" Mariela looked around sharply. Elsin stood beside her. "Then whose—" The elderly healer's face turned pale. "A second healer, one of the women rescued from the abbey. She never reached the mountain pass. Vedrin had taken another innocent. He had learned nothing from Melis's sacrifice. He was preparing to force one final choice, and this time, the fate of 2 kingdoms would be decided beneath the ruins where peace had first been murdered. The old summit hall stood exactly where the border divided the 2 kingdoms. 30 years earlier, kings had gathered there believing peace would last forever. Today, 2 armies waited where diplomats once had. Human banners stretched across the eastern ridge. Moonfang standards covered the western hills. Thousands of soldiers stood with weapons drawn. One mistake, and history would repeat itself. Mariela, Alpha King Rovan, Lady Elsin, and the elderly archivist walked into the valley together. No armor, no raised swords, only the covenant, the recovered ledger, and the truth. High Chancellor Vedrin waited beneath the broken archway. Several masked soldiers surrounded him. At their feet knelt the kidnapped healer, bound but alive. The bronze wolf pendant rested in Vedrin's hand. His smile never reached his eyes. "You actually came." Rovan stopped several paces away. "Release her," Vedrin laughed quietly. "You still believe this is about saving one woman." He gestured toward the armies covering both hillsides. "This is about kingdoms. This is about history. This is about power." Mariela stepped forward. "No, it's about lies." Vedrin almost smiled. "No, it's about people. People don't want truth. Truth asks them to admit they were wrong. Truth demands change. Fear asks nothing. Fear gives them someone to hate, someone to blame, someone to follow. That is why fear always wins." His words rolled across the silent valley. Even some soldiers lowered their eyes. Because somewhere inside, they understood exactly what he meant. Vedrin tossed the bronze pendant toward Mariela. She caught it. "Keep it." The pendant was never important, only what people believed about it. The valley echoed with the sound of war horns. Generals from both kingdoms rode forward. Every eye turned toward Alpha King Rovan. Instead of raising his sword, he stepped into the open ground between both armies. "There is something you deserve to hear from me. Before you hear another word." Complete silence settled over the valley. "Years ago, before I became your king, I led an attack on Silver Brook. My scouts told me enemy soldiers were hiding there. I believed them. I gave the order. When we arrived, we found families instead. Children, farmers, people who had never raised a weapon against us." His voice remained steady, but grief weighed behind every word. "I cannot undo what happened there. Their blood will remain on my hands for the rest of my life. No lie, no victory, no crown will ever change that." Murmurs spread through the Moonfang ranks. Some soldiers stared at their king in disbelief. Others lowered their weapons slightly. Rovan looked from one army to the other. "If you cannot forgive me, I understand. But do not allow another generation to die, because I once believed the same lie someone taught all of us." Mariela looked at him. He had just confessed the darkest moment of his life, before thousands of people. No one had forced him. Truth had. The elderly archivist stepped forward. The covenant, the ledger, the letters, everything was laid upon a weathered stone table beneath the ruined archway. Lady Elsin carefully unfolded the original treaty. Mariela held it high enough for both armies to see. "These signatures are real. These orders are real. These deaths were planned. Not by humans, not by werewolves, by one man who taught us to fear one another." The elderly human general slowly approached, hands trembling. He recognized the royal seals immediately. Across the valley, the Moonfang commander removed his helmet. His father had died during the night of broken moons. His entire life had been built upon revenge. He stared at the documents without speaking. Vedrin's calm expression finally began to crack. "Enough. He drew a concealed blade and seized the kidnapped healer. One more step, and she dies. The valley froze. Vadrin looked directly at Rovan. Choose, save her, or stop me. You cannot have both. Mariela felt her heart sink. She already knew his answer. Rovan stepped toward the healer, not toward Vadrin. Always, the same weakness. Vadrin sneered. You choose people over victory. Rovan never looked away from the frightened healer. I choose the future. Vadrin shoved the healer aside and lunged toward the documents. If he destroyed them, hatred might still survive. Mariela reacted instantly. She swept the covenant away moments before his blade struck the stone. The ledger scattered across the ground. Letters caught the wind. Pages drifted across the valley like white birds. Hundreds of soldiers watched as written orders bearing Vadrin's own seal landed at their feet. One human captain picked up a page. A Moonfang warrior beside him picked up another. Neither man spoke. They simply read. Vadrin swung wildly toward Mariela. Rovan intercepted him. Steel rang beneath the broken arches. One strike, another, then silence. Vadrin's sword slid across the stone. Rovan's blade rested against his throat. Kill me, Vadrin laughed through bloodied lips. Become exactly what they've always believed you are, the Beast King. Rovan looked down at him. Slowly, he lowered his sword. Justice ends this, not revenge. Royal guards from both kingdoms stepped forward together. Vadrin looked around in disbelief. No, you're supposed to hate each other. Then, a frightened cry echoed across the valley. A little girl, no older than 6, had wandered between both armies, searching for her injured father. She stood directly between hundreds of drawn weapons. For one terrifying heartbeat, no one moved. Then a human soldier threw down his sword. At the exact same moment, a Moonfang warrior dropped his axe. Both men ran toward the little girl. Neither cared who reached her first. The human soldier lifted her into his arms. The werewolf shielded both of them with his own body. Around them, silence spread through the valley. One by one, weapons touched the ground. A spear, a shield, a sword, then hundreds more. Not because kings ordered it, because ordinary people had finally chosen one another over fear. Tears filled Lady Elson's eyes. Mariela looked around the valley. 30 years of hatred, ended by the same simple truth that had changed her own heart. Someone had to choose first. Royal guards bound Vadrin's wrists. He no longer struggled. He simply stared as soldiers from both kingdoms began helping each other's wounded. His greatest weapon had vanished. As the sun settled behind the mountains, Mariela stepped beside Rovan. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Peace had not been won by stronger armies. It had been won because enough people had finally found the courage to stop believing a lie. Tomorrow would bring rebuilding. Tomorrow would bring forgiveness. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations. But today, the war had ended before it truly began. And for the first time in 30 years, hope walked freely across the border. Autumn arrived quietly. Golden leaves drifted across the old border road, where soldiers had once stood with drawn swords. Now the great iron gates stood open. No guards, no barricades, only a stone path stretching from Elaris into the Moonfang dominion. Mariela walked slowly toward the gates, the bronze wolf pendant resting against her chest once again. Children's laughter carried on the breeze. A little human girl chased a wolf pup through the tall grass, while 2 exhausted mothers, one human, one werewolf, laughed together from a nearby market stall. The children never paused to ask who belonged to which kingdom. To them, there had never been an enemy. A few steps farther stood the restored summit hall. Its shattered pillars had been rebuilt, but one section remained untouched. The broken stone had been left exactly as it had fallen 30 years before, not as a scar to reopen, as a promise never to forget. Names covered the memorial wall. Human, werewolf, side by side. No kingdom separated them, only by the lives they had lived. Mariela stopped before one name, Captain Maelis. She knelt and placed the small carved wooden wolf beside a single white flower. The little gift that had once reminded her that kindness could exist inside the kingdom she had been sent to destroy now belonged to the man who had given everything so both kingdoms could live. Footsteps approached. Alpha King Rovan came to stand beside her. Without speaking, he unclasped the wolf emblem brooch from his cloak and placed it gently beneath Mayelis's name. Neither of them disturbed the silence. Some gratitude needed no words. They continued walking until they reached the border gates. The road into Alaris stretched peacefully beneath the afternoon sun. Merchants crossed freely in both directions. Farmers exchanged harvest baskets. Children wandered wherever curiosity carried them. Mariela stopped beside an old weathered boundary stone, half buried beneath wildflowers. Its faded markings were barely visible now. She rested her fingers against its rough surface. Memory flooded back. She remembered crouching behind that very stone beneath the cover of darkness, one hand gripping a poisoned dagger, the other clutching the mission that had defined her entire life. She had crossed this border believing she carried salvation. Instead, she had carried another man's hatred. Slowly, she closed her eyes. Then she opened them again. The stone no longer marked the place where she had gone to kill. It marked the place where she had finally become free. Rovan stepped beside her. "The first time you crossed this border, I refused to let you leave." She smiled softly. "You did." He reached into his cloak and removed a folded parchment bearing the royal seals of both kingdoms. He placed it into her hands. "Every accusation against you has been erased. Your name has been restored. You are free in both kingdoms." Mariela looked down at the document, then back at him. His expression was as calm as it had been the night they first met. "You owe Moonfang nothing. You owe me nothing. If your heart leads you back to Alaris, go. If your future lies somewhere else, go. Whatever you choose, it will belong only to you. No commands, no expectations, no promises demanded. Only freedom." Mariela nodded once, then she turned toward Alaris. One step, then another. Behind her, Rovan remained exactly where he was. He did not follow. He did not call her name. He simply honored the freedom he had fought to give her. The familiar hills stretched before her. The scent of autumn fields drifted across the valley. This had once been the only home she believed she would ever know. Now, home felt larger than a kingdom. She looked down at the pendant resting in her palm, then back toward the open gates, toward the memorial, toward the people rebuilding lives that fear had nearly destroyed. A quiet smile touched her face. She turned around. Rovan was still waiting. Not with hope, not with expectation, only with respect. Mariela walked back across the border. Every step felt lighter than the one before. When she finally stood before him, she reached for his hand. This time, he waited, giving her one final chance to choose another path. Instead, she gently intertwined her fingers with his. No words were needed. The answer had already been given. Together they turned toward the restored summit hall. Behind them, the great gates remained wide open. 30 years earlier, the border had been built to keep two worlds apart. Now it remained open, because two people had finally chosen to walk toward each other instead. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, drop your comments, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next story.